She was a starving POW. The cowboy who saved her changed her fate forever. Clara had always imagined that life would be kind in small ways: warm bread on the table, a soft pillow at night, the gentle laughter of friends. But now, in the cold confines of the prisoner of war camp, those thoughts seemed like distant dreams from another life. Each day began and ended with the same sense of emptiness and fear. She awoke to the sounds of harsh voices and clanging metal gates, and each morning she counted herself lucky if she could still move, if she could still take in a deep breath without pain. Hunger gnawed at her stomach constantly, a dull ache that became sharper with every passing hour. The camp was surrounded by tall, rough wooden fences topped with barbed wire, and guards walked the perimeter with strict, watchful eyes. Clara had learned quickly that any misstep could bring punishment, even if it was unintentional. The prisoners had been told little about why they were held, and every rumor about the war or approaching forces carried equal weight of hope and fear. Many of the prisoners had been there for months, some for years. Faces in the crowd of weary souls blurred together, each one hollow-eyed and silent, carrying stories that went untold. Clara, at only 22, was one of the youngest, and she felt the weight of her vulnerability every single day. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, worn thin from days without proper washing or repair. The mud-stained floor beneath her made each step an effort, and the nights were cold, leaving her shivering under thin blankets that barely offered comfort. Sleep was elusive. It was hard to rest when the body was weak and the mind was alert, always anticipating the next challenge or the next call from the guards. She missed the simple pleasures she had taken for granted: soft sunlight on her face, the taste of fresh bread, the laughter of children. But in the camp, those things existed only in memory. Hunger was not the only enemy. Illness spread like a shadow through the rows of cramped barracks, and many prisoners succumbed to it quietly, with no one to mourn them properly. Clara watched friends grow weaker and disappear, taken by diseases that seemed to strike randomly, with no mercy or warning. She kept herself alive with small rituals, taking careful sips of water when no one was watching, sharing a crumb of bread with someone more desperate than herself, whispering silent encouragement to keep her mind sharp. These small acts felt like rebellions against despair, tiny sparks of resistance that reminded her she was still human. Despite the darkness, Clara's spirit had not entirely dimmed. She found herself thinking about her family back home, about the little farm where she had grown up, the smell of fresh hay in the morning, the sun warming her face as she tended the animals. She imagined her mother's smile, her father's laughter, and it gave her strength. Each memory became a lifeline, something she could clutch when the world around her seemed determined to erase her existence. She whispered these memories to herself at night, letting them fill the hollow spaces in her chest. There were other prisoners too, each with their own stories. Some had been soldiers, some civilians like her, all thrown together by circumstances beyond their control. A few tried to keep their spirits alive with quiet jokes or whispered songs at night, but most were too drained by hunger and fear. Clara sometimes shared her meager portion of food with them, even when it meant she would go to bed hungrier. She knew that kindness was a choice, and in that place, it was a rare commodity. Small acts of generosity reminded them that they were still human, that hope had not completely disappeared. The guards were relentless, and Clara learned to move quietly, to avoid attention, and to anticipate danger. The camp had its own harsh rules, and the slightest mistake could bring punishment. She remembered one morning when a fellow prisoner stumbled and dropped a bowl of gruel. The guards had shouted, and the prisoner had been forced to stand in the cold, humiliated. Clara shivered as she watched, knowing that any misstep, no matter how small, could bring her own suffering. It was a world where fear lived in every shadow and every glance. But it was not only fear that shaped her days. Clara discovered small pockets of beauty even here. Sometimes, in the early morning, when the sun was just beginning to rise, she would see birds circling high above the fences. Their freedom seemed like a promise that life could be different, that there could be light beyond the darkness of the camp. She clutched these moments, letting her imagination fly with the birds, dreaming of open fields and wide skies. In those minutes, she allowed herself to hope, to remember that the world outside was still vast and alive. Clara's mind also turned to survival strategies. She learned to conserve her strength, to move carefully, and to ration what little food she had. She observed the patterns of the guards, noting the times when the camp was quieter, when the risk of notice was lower. She became clever in small ways, sharing information with others, quietly helping those weaker than herself, and learning to endure hunger without letting it steal her mind completely. Each day she survived was a small victory, a quiet act of courage that strengthened her resolve. At night, when the camp fell silent except for distant footsteps and the rustling of blankets, Clara often whispered prayers. They were not formal prayers, but words of hope, wishes for strength, and the longing for freedom. She whispered the names of her family, of friends she missed, and even of people she had never met but imagined might help her someday. In these quiet moments, she felt a fragile connection to a world that seemed far away but not completely gone. Clara had learned that despair could be contagious. She watched prisoners lose hope and fade away not just from hunger but from giving up. She refused to let herself do the same. She focused on tiny victories, finishing a small portion of food, helping another prisoner, surviving another day. Every act became a defiance against the hopelessness that surrounded her. Even when her body ached and her stomach growled, she reminded herself that her mind and spirit were hers to protect. One afternoon, Clara noticed something unusual. Beyond the tall fences, she caught a glimpse of movement, a figure, small against the horizon, carrying a bundle. It was distant and fleeting, but it stirred something deep within her. For the first time in weeks, her heart raced not with fear, but with curiosity and a flicker of hope. She dared to imagine that perhaps help could arrive, that someone could break the walls of her confinement, that the world outside the camp might still care. This small spark of hope became a quiet obsession. Clara began to watch for any signs, any movement beyond the fence, any change in the routines of the camp. She whispered to herself that perhaps the world outside had not forgotten her, that perhaps she was not entirely alone. The days remained hard, but now there was a new feeling alongside the fear and hunger, a fragile, flickering hope that survival was possible and that life could continue beyond the barbed wire. Even as the sun set and darkness fell over the camp, Clara held onto this feeling. She imagined warmth, freedom, and safety, not as fantasies but as possibilities. Each day she endured, each act of small kindness or careful planning, became a step toward that possibility. And though the world around her was harsh and unyielding, Clara discovered that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit could hold on, could wait, and could hope. And so, as she lay on the thin mattress that barely cushioned her tired body, Clara closed her eyes and let herself dream. She dreamed of open skies, of sunlight on her face, of kindness in a world that had seemed so cruel. She dreamed of freedom, of life, and of the day when she might walk beyond the fences and feel the world fully again. Though the nights were long and the days harder still, Clara's heart refused to surrender. Somewhere beyond the walls and barbed wire, hope was waiting, and she would find it. Clara had begun to accept the rhythm of the camp, the endless days of waiting, the gnawing hunger, and the quiet despair. Yet deep inside, she had never fully given up hope. That hope had become a quiet ember, faint but persistent, and it was on an ordinary morning that it first began to glow brighter. She noticed a small stir of activity beyond the fences, something unusual in a place where every day had a familiar and oppressive sameness. At first, she thought it might be another routine inspection or a new group of guards, But as she watched more closely, she realized that this was different. A figure appeared on the horizon, walking steadily across the rough terrain. He was tall and strong, dressed not in a uniform but in simple clothes. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, and a rugged coat hung loosely over his shoulders. In his hands he carried a bundle, carefully balanced, moving with a quiet determination. Clara squinted through the weak morning light, her curiosity growing with each step he took. There was a calm confidence in his movements, a sense of purpose that felt almost foreign in a place defined by fear and uncertainty. As he approached closer, Clara could see that he was not alone in his mission. A small group of others accompanied him, carrying supplies and carefully surveying the area around them. Their arrival was silent, measured, and deliberate, as if they knew the weight of the responsibility they carried. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Could this be someone who had come to help them? She had never dared to hope for a rescue, but now, seeing these people moving with quiet care, her heart refused to stay calm. The man in front, who would later become the center of her story, paused for a moment to observe the camp. Clara watched him carefully, noting the way he took in every detail, the fences, the gates, the positions of the guards, without fear or hesitation. There was a gentleness in his gaze, despite the ruggedness of his appearance, a careful attention to the prisoners, as though he understood their suffering even before speaking a word. Clara's chest tightened as she realized that someone had come with the intention of helping, and not just in passing, but with a plan. Days had blurred together, but Clara remembered the moment he first reached the fence. He knelt down and quietly handed small portions of food over, enough for a few prisoners to receive at a time. Clara was among the first to reach the spot. She held out her hands, trembling, unsure if it was real. When the warmth of the bread touched her skin, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. It was the first time in what felt like months that she had tasted something nourishing, something that filled not just her stomach but her spirit. The simple act of sharing sustenance was profound in a place where every day had been a struggle for survival. He introduced himself softly, his voice calm but confident. "I'm Jack," he said, "and I'm here to help you." The name seemed ordinary, yet it carried a weight Clara could not yet understand. There was no grand speech, no promises of a sudden escape. He simply offered food, water, and a quiet assurance that someone had seen their suffering and intended to act. In that moment, Clara felt a flicker of trust, a fragile, delicate thing, but powerful enough to lift a small corner of the darkness that had settled over her heart. Jack moved carefully among the prisoners, distributing food and supplies with an attentiveness that seemed almost personal. He remembered names, or tried to learn them, and asked quietly how each person was doing. Clara noticed the way his eyes lingered on those who looked weakest, the way he adjusted the portions slightly to ensure that those most in need received a little extra. It was a simple act, yet it carried more meaning than any speech or promise could. Clara felt seen for the first time in months, and that recognition sparked a cautious hope within her. Over the next few days, Jack returned repeatedly. Each visit brought more than just food. He brought blankets, medicine, and small comforts that reminded the prisoners of the world beyond the fences. Clara began to observe him carefully, noting how he moved with a quiet strength, how he seemed unafraid of the guards yet respectful of their boundaries. There was a rhythm to his work, a careful balance of courage and caution that inspired the prisoners to hold onto their own resilience. His presence became a small anchor, a reminder that not all humanity had been lost to the harshness of the camp. For Clara, the impact was more profound than she expected. She had been starving, not just in body but in spirit, and Jack's arrival fed both. She found herself looking forward to the moments when he would appear, a faint hope fluttering in her chest each time the fence gates creaked open. She began to feel strength returning, her body slowly responding to nourishment, her mind regaining focus after weeks of foggy exhaustion. She even started to speak softly with other prisoners about him, sharing observations and small stories of his visits. Each retelling felt like a spark of life in the otherwise gray days. Jack noticed Clara's resilience, the way she quietly encouraged others and endured hardships without complaint. He took particular care in bringing supplies that would help her regain strength. When he handed her a small bundle of bread, he smiled gently. "Take it slow," he said. "Every bit counts." Clara accepted it with a nod, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest, not just from the food, but from the kindness and attentiveness of someone who genuinely cared. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten could exist. Beyond the physical aid, Jack began to share stories, small, everyday tales of life outside the camp. He spoke of the wide-open plains, of cattle grazing in golden fields, of the stars at night and the quiet wind in the trees. These stories were simple, yet they transported Clara and the other prisoners to a world that had felt completely lost. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to imagine freedom, safety, and a life beyond the fences. Each story was like a small window opening, letting light into a place that had seemed perpetually dark. As the days went by, Clara grew stronger, and her mind became sharper. She began to anticipate Jack's visits, to watch for the glimmer of movement beyond the fence, and to prepare herself for the moments when hope could feel real. She started helping others quietly, sharing small portions of food she received, offering encouragement to those too weak to stand. Jack's presence had created a ripple, reminding everyone that kindness and courage could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Clara realized that survival was no longer just about endurance. It was about holding onto humanity in a place designed to strip it away. One day, during a particularly hot afternoon, Clara noticed that Jack lingered longer than usual. He spoke softly to her, asking about her health, offering advice on rationing food and sharing small tips to stay strong. There was no rush, no urgency, just a calm, steady presence that allowed her to feel safe. Clara found herself speaking more freely, trusting him in ways she had not trusted anyone in the camp. She realized that his care was not just about survival. It was about restoring dignity, about reminding people that they were more than the suffering around them. Jack's visits became a rhythm of hope, a promise that change was possible. Clara's body began to regain strength, but more importantly, her spirit began to recover. She remembered the dreams she had whispered to herself at night and allowed herself to hope once again. There was a quiet understanding growing between them, a recognition that survival could be shared, that trust could exist even in the darkest times. The small acts of compassion and attention became the foundation for something much larger, a chance at life beyond the barbed wire, a chance at freedom and a future. By the end of this period, Clara felt a transformation. She was no longer the fragile, broken figure who had first entered the camp. She was regaining confidence, strength, and a sense of purpose. She realized that hope could exist even in despair, that courage could be nurtured through kindness, and that the presence of one person willing to care could change everything. Jack had not yet led them to freedom, but he had given them something just as important: belief in the possibility of survival and the knowledge that someone truly cared about their fate. Clara looked forward to the next day, the next visit, the next chance to feel that spark of hope once again. She began to see the camp differently, not as a place designed to destroy, but as a challenge she could endure, one day at a time, because she now had a reason to survive. Jack's quiet bravery had shifted her perspective, transforming fear into cautious optimism, hunger into energy, and despair into a fragile but growing hope. And in that hope, Clara began to see a path that could lead her beyond the fences, beyond the camp, and into a future that she had thought lost forever. Even as night fell, she lay on her thin mattress, not shivering as before, but with a sense of possibility stirring within her. She whispered a quiet thanks to the man who had arrived like a lifeline, carrying food, warmth, and something she had almost forgotten: hope. The small ember that had glimmered within her heart was now a growing flame, and she realized that survival was no longer just about enduring. It was about believing that life beyond this place was still worth fighting for. The days of waiting and small comforts had built something in Clara that she had almost forgotten existed: hope. It was fragile, yes, but it was alive, and now Jack had returned with a new purpose. He was no longer just a visitor bringing food and small kindnesses. There was a determination in his stride, a sense of urgency in his calm movements. Clara noticed it immediately. The moment he appeared beyond the fence, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear, her heart pounding as she watched him approach. He carried no bundle of food this time. Instead, he carried a small, well-worn satchel and a rolled blanket, symbols of a mission that was about to begin. Jack moved with quiet efficiency, scanning the area before speaking. His voice was soft but firm. "Clara," he said, "it's time to get you out. It will not be easy, but we can do this if we stay careful and follow each step." Clara felt her chest tighten. Escape. The idea had always been a distant dream, something she had imagined at night while lying on the thin mattress in the cold barracks. Yet now, standing in front of her, Jack made it seem possible. He looked her in the eyes, and she could see the resolve there, a promise that he would not let her face this alone. The plan was simple in its design but perilous in its execution. Jack had observed the camp for weeks, noting the routines of the guards, the timing of patrols, and the weak points in the fence. He had carefully mapped a route through which a small group of prisoners could quietly slip beyond the perimeter without being noticed. Clara listened intently as he explained each step, committing every detail to memory. Every word carried weight, every pause reminded her of the danger. Fear bubbled in her stomach, but alongside it was a growing trust. She had seen his courage and his care, and now she knew that if anyone could guide her through this, it was him. The escape began just as dusk fell, when shadows stretched long across the camp and visibility was low. Clara clutched the small bundle Jack had handed her, a blanket and a few morsels of food, and followed his lead. They moved in silence, stepping over uneven ground and slipping past guards who seemed unaware of their careful passage. Clara's heart pounded in her chest with every creaking floorboard and distant shout. She was painfully aware of her weakened body, but determination pushed her forward. She would not let fear stop her. Not now, when freedom was within reach. As they moved, Jack whispered instructions and reassurances. "Stay close," he said. "Keep your head down. We will get through this together." Clara noticed the steadiness in his voice, the calm that contrasted with the tension around them. It was comforting, like a lifeline in the darkness. She found herself matching his pace, focusing not on the dangers that might lie ahead, but on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. Step by step, they crept toward the first barrier, a stretch of fencing that separated the barracks from the open fields beyond. Jack had prepared for this. He had brought tools to carefully cut a small gap in the wire, enough for a person to slip through without drawing attention. Clara watched as he worked with precision, his hands steady despite the stakes. When he nodded, signaling that the path was clear, Clara swallowed hard and slipped through the opening. The cool evening air hit her face, a sensation she had almost forgotten. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The world outside the camp felt enormous, full of possibilities and dangers alike. Once through the fence, they moved quickly but cautiously across the open fields. Clara could see the shadows of trees in the distance, promising cover from any watchful eyes. Jack kept a low profile, scanning the surroundings for any sign of guards or patrols. He pointed out paths through the underbrush, small depressions in the ground that allowed them to move quietly. Clara followed his guidance, her body aching from weakness but driven by the desire to survive. She realized that she trusted him completely, not just to lead her physically, but to protect her hope and her spirit. The journey was exhausting. Clara's body ached, her stomach growled, and her lungs burned from exertion. Yet Jack's presence was a constant source of encouragement. "Almost there," he whispered at one point, resting for just a moment against a tree. "You're doing better than you think. Keep going." His words, simple and steady, were enough to push her forward when her strength threatened to fail. Each step was a test of endurance, each movement a small victory. Clara had never felt more alive, more aware of the preciousness of each breath, each heartbeat. Along the way, Jack shared stories, quiet, gentle stories of his life as a cowboy, of the wide-open plains, the animals he tended, and the quiet nights under a blanket of stars. Clara listened, letting the images paint a world beyond the shadows and fences of the camp. These stories became more than distractions. They were lifelines, reminders that life outside this place was full of beauty, freedom, and safety. She began to imagine herself living in that world, running through open fields, feeling the sun on her face, and breathing deeply without fear. Night fell fully as they approached a small river, a natural barrier that marked the halfway point of their journey. Jack led Clara to a shallow crossing, showing her how to step carefully on the slippery stones. The water was cold, shocking her body, but the sensation was strangely invigorating. It reminded her that she was moving, that she was alive, and that freedom was no longer an abstract dream but a tangible reality within reach. Jack guided her hand, steadying her when her legs trembled, offering a comforting presence that made the danger feel less overwhelming. On the far side of the river, they paused for a brief moment of rest. Clara sat on a rock, breathing heavily, her body exhausted but her spirit unbroken. Jack handed her a small piece of bread from his satchel, and she ate it gratefully, savoring every bite. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "Just a little further now." His confidence in her gave her confidence in herself. She realized that this journey was not just about escaping the camp. It was about reclaiming her own strength, learning to trust her instincts, and discovering courage she had never known she possessed. The final leg of their journey took them through a narrow forest path. Darkness enveloped them, but the canopy of trees provided cover, hiding them from potential discovery. Clara's senses were heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal sound, felt amplified in the stillness. Yet Jack's calm presence guided her through the tension, each step measured, each breath deliberate. She felt a sense of partnership growing between them, an unspoken understanding that they were not just surviving together, but relying on one another in ways that transcended fear or danger. Finally, after hours of careful travel, they reached a small clearing. Clara could see faint lights in the distance, signs of safety, signs of civilization. Relief and gratitude washed over her in a wave, and she realized that she had not only survived the night, but she had been transformed by it. The journey had been grueling, yes, but it had also revealed a resilience within her that she had not known she possessed. She looked at Jack, her heart swelling with gratitude and respect, and knew that she would never forget the courage and care that had brought her this far. Jack smiled at her, a quiet, reassuring smile. "We're almost safe," he said. "Just a little further and you'll be free." Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, fear and hope, all intertwined. Each step towards safety was a victory over the darkness that had threatened to consume her, each breath a declaration that she would survive. She realized that this journey was not just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, and deeply personal. She had been tested in ways she had never imagined, and yet she had endured. As the first signs of dawn began to lighten the sky, they reached the edge of the safe area, where relief workers and allies were waiting. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes as she stepped into the light, her body trembling from exhaustion but her spirit soaring. Jack stayed close, guiding her gently, ensuring that she crossed the final threshold into safety. In that moment, Clara felt the full weight of her journey, the fear, the hunger, the despair, and the triumph of having overcome it with courage, determination, and the unwavering support of a man who had believed in her when she had struggled to believe in herself. As they rested in the warmth of the safe camp, Clara began to recover slowly, both physically and emotionally. Jack stayed nearby, offering quiet encouragement, sharing simple acts of kindness, and helping her adjust to the idea that she was truly free. She realized that this journey had changed her, had strengthened her, and had revealed the power of trust and human connection. She had learned that even in the darkest circumstances, courage, kindness, and determination could light a path to freedom. By the end of that long night and early morning, Clara felt a profound shift within herself. She was no longer just a prisoner of circumstance. She was a survivor, a woman who had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, guided by someone who had refused to let her despair define her. She looked at Jack with gratitude that words could barely capture, knowing that her life had been forever altered by his courage, his care, and the quiet strength that had carried them both through the night. After the long journey to safety, Clara finally felt the first true moments of calm she had experienced in months. The warm sunlight fell gently through the trees, a sensation she had almost forgotten, and the soft sounds of life outside the camp, the rustling of leaves, the distant chatter of workers, and the quiet flow of a nearby stream, reminded her that she was no longer trapped. Her body was exhausted, her muscles sore, and her stomach still sensitive from weeks of hunger. But for the first time in a long time, her heart felt lighter. She was safe, and the weight of constant fear began to lift, replaced by the fragile hope that life could continue beyond the shadows of the past. Jack stayed close to her side, offering quiet support without intruding. He had a gentle way of moving and speaking, the kind of presence that made her feel grounded in a world that had seemed so uncertain for so long. When he offered her a warm drink and a soft blanket, Clara accepted it with gratitude, savoring the comfort that came from the smallest things. It wasn't just the physical nourishment that mattered, it was the care he showed, the quiet assurance that she was no longer alone. Slowly, she began to allow herself to relax, to let go of some of the tension that had kept her muscles taut for months. The first days of recovery were challenging. Clara's body was weak, and simple movements left her breathless. Eating and drinking required careful attention, and she had to learn to pace herself, to rebuild strength one step at a time. Jack remained patient, guiding her gently and encouraging her to listen to her own body. "Take your time," he said. "You don't have to rush. Your body needs to heal first." His calm reassurance allowed Clara to focus on small victories, finishing a meal, walking a few steps without assistance, or simply standing in the sunlight and feeling the warmth on her skin. Each accomplishment, no matter how minor it seemed, became a reminder that she was alive and capable of recovery. As her body regained strength, Clara's mind began to heal as well. She spent quiet hours reflecting on her experiences in the camp, the fear, the hunger, the despair, and slowly began to process the emotions she had been forced to suppress. Jack encouraged her to speak about her memories if she wished, but never pressured her. Sometimes she would sit in silence while he worked nearby, tending to chores or preparing food, and just knowing he was there was comforting enough. Other times, she found herself sharing small pieces of her story, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as she realized that she could tell her truth without fear of judgment. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, Jack would sit with her near the campfire, sharing simple stories of his life before the war. He spoke of open fields, horses grazing under the warm sun, and quiet nights beneath a sky full of stars. Clara listened intently, letting the images paint a world she had almost forgotten existed. These stories became more than entertainment. They were reminders of life beyond hardship, a vision of freedom and normalcy that fueled her determination to recover fully. She found herself imagining herself living in that world, running freely through open meadows, laughing without fear and breathing without restraint. Their bond grew slowly but steadily. It was not romantic at first. It was built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. Jack had risked his safety to help her, and Clara recognized the courage that required. She began to feel a deep gratitude, coupled with admiration for his calm strength and unwavering determination. They spoke of small dreams, of simple pleasures, and of things they hoped to see in the future. In these conversations, Clara found a sense of normalcy returning, a connection that reminded her that human kindness could endure even in the darkest times. As the days passed, Clara began to regain more physical independence. She could walk longer distances without assistance, her appetite improved, and her energy returned in small but steady increments. Each day of progress was celebrated quietly, with a smile, a nod, or a small word of encouragement from Jack. He never exaggerated or pressured her. He simply recognized the significance of each step she took toward recovery. Slowly, Clara began to see herself not as a broken prisoner, but as a survivor, someone capable of enduring hardship and rebuilding her life with strength and dignity. During this time, Clara also discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She began to help others in the safe camp, offering small acts of care to those still recovering from hardship. She distributed blankets, prepared meals, and offered words of encouragement to those who needed them most. Through helping others, she found healing for herself. Each smile she received, each grateful glance, reminded her that compassion could be a powerful force, capable of restoring hope not only to others but to oneself. Jack noticed this transformation and often watched quietly, offering praise in subtle ways, reinforcing her growing confidence without overshadowing it. Their conversations grew deeper as well. Clara began to share more personal reflections, her fears, and the hopes she had nurtured in secret. Jack listened attentively, offering wisdom, comfort, and perspective without ever making her feel judged or small. He encouraged her to dream again, to imagine a life beyond survival, and to trust in her own resilience. Clara realized that this guidance was as important as the physical care he had provided. Through his presence, she learned to navigate not just the scars of the past, but the possibilities of the future. One morning, as the sun rose gently over the horizon, Clara and Jack took a walk along a quiet path outside the camp. The air was crisp and clean, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a peaceful backdrop. Clara noticed how much she had changed since the first days of her captivity. The fear that had once dominated her mind had softened, replaced by a growing confidence in her own strength. She walked taller, breathed more deeply, and felt a quiet sense of gratitude for every step she could now take. Jack walked beside her, offering guidance when needed, but allowing her space to find her own rhythm. During their walks, Clara began to notice small joys she had forgotten: the softness of grass beneath her feet, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the soothing sound of birdsong. Each sensation reminded her that the world was alive and beautiful, and that she had a place in it. She began to laugh more freely, to speak more openly, and to find delight in simple moments. These small experiences became milestones in her recovery, markers of a life slowly returning to normalcy. Jack observed this transformation with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that the greatest victories often came in the smallest, most ordinary moments. As weeks passed, Clara's bond with Jack deepened further. She found herself relying on him not just for guidance or support, but for companionship and understanding. Their shared experiences had created a connection that went beyond words, a silent acknowledgement of courage, resilience, and trust. They worked together in the camp, shared stories, and even planned small tasks for the future. Clara began to see Jack not only as a protector and guide, but as a friend and mentor, someone who had shown her the true power of compassion and courage. Through this time of recovery, Clara also reflected on her own inner strength. She realized that she had survived not only because of external help, but because she had refused to give up entirely. Each act of endurance, each moment of quiet bravery had contributed to her survival. Jack's presence had amplified this strength, but the foundation had always been within her. She learned to trust herself, to recognize her own resilience, and to embrace the idea that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. By the end of this period, Clara was no longer defined by her past hardships. She had rebuilt her body, restored her spirit, and discovered a profound sense of purpose. The small acts of courage and kindness she had experienced and witnessed had transformed her outlook on life. She felt a renewed connection to the world around her, a sense of belonging, and a readiness to embrace the future. Jack had been a crucial part of this transformation, but Clara recognized that her own determination, resilience, and willingness to hope had been equally important. As the sun set one evening, casting a warm golden glow over the camp, Clara and Jack sat quietly by the fire. The flames danced in their eyes, reflecting both the warmth of the moment and the journey they had shared. Clara felt a deep gratitude, not just for the physical safety she now enjoyed, but for the emotional and spiritual restoration she had experienced. She realized that the journey of recovery was ongoing, but she was no longer afraid of the path ahead. With Jack by her side and her own inner strength guiding her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges life might present. Clara understood, more clearly than ever, that life was fragile but resilient, and that hope could be nurtured even in the most difficult circumstances. She had been transformed not only by her experiences of hardship, but by the kindness, courage, and unwavering support of someone who had chosen to believe in her when she struggled to believe in herself. She knew that this bond, this shared journey of survival and healing, would remain with her forever, a reminder that even in the darkest times, human connection could restore faith, strength, and hope. And so, as the stars began to twinkle above them that night, Clara closed her eyes with a sense of peace. She had endured, survived, and begun to heal. She had discovered courage, resilience, and the power of kindness. And she knew that her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to embrace it fully, with hope as her guide and Jack as a steadfast companion. After weeks of recovery and careful nurturing, Clara finally began to feel fully herself again. Her body had regained its strength, and her mind had begun to process the weight of all she had endured. The nights of terror, hunger, and fear seemed like distant shadows, though she never forgot them. She had survived, and now the world before her was wide and open, filled with possibilities she had once thought impossible. Each morning, as the sun rose and cast warm light across the fields around the safe camp, Clara felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not only for her freedom, but for the journey that had led her to this point. Jack remained a steady presence, though he no longer needed to guide her as carefully as before. He continued to offer his quiet support, sharing in the small joys of life and helping her adjust to the new rhythm of days filled with freedom. They worked together on the small tasks of daily life, preparing meals, organizing supplies, walking through the fields, but it was no longer about survival alone. These activities became a way for Clara to reclaim a sense of normalcy, a chance to rediscover the small pleasures of life she had longed for during her imprisonment. As Clara began to venture beyond the camp with Jack, she discovered a world she had almost forgotten existed. She felt the grass beneath her feet, soft and green. She listened to the birds singing overhead. She inhaled the fresh air and felt it fill her lungs with energy she had once thought lost. The sensation of freedom was intoxicating, but it was also grounding, reminding her of the life that awaited her beyond the shadows of fear. She began to walk longer distances, explore the woods and fields around the camp, and even laugh freely, a sound she had not made in months, and one that surprised her with its warmth and ease. During this time, Clara reflected deeply on the experiences that had shaped her. She realized that the hardships she had endured had not only tested her body, but also her spirit. She had faced fear and hunger, despair and uncertainty, and yet she had survived. She recognized that her resilience had been her greatest strength, and that the trust she had placed in Jack had allowed her to reclaim not only her life, but also her hope. Each day she felt more confident in her ability to face challenges, more certain that she could live a life filled with purpose and meaning. Jack, for his part, had always treated her with respect, patience, and care. He never forced her to move faster than she could, never pressured her to speak before she was ready, and never underestimated her strength. His quiet presence and unwavering support had allowed her to grow, heal, and trust again. Clara often thought about the risks he had taken to ensure her safety, and she felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words. It was not just the physical guidance that mattered. It was the example he had set, showing her that courage, kindness, and integrity could exist even in the most difficult circumstances. As Clara regained her strength, she began to consider the future she wanted to build for herself. She realized that she could not simply return to life as it had been before the war. She had been changed, transformed by the experiences she had survived. She wanted to dedicate her life to helping others who had faced similar hardships, to share the lessons she had learned about resilience, hope, and the power of human kindness. This sense of purpose became a guiding light, motivating her to continue moving forward to heal and to embrace the opportunities that lay ahead. In the evenings, Clara and Jack often sat together by the campfire, reflecting on the journey they had shared. They spoke of simple things at first, the beauty of the stars, the quiet sounds of the night, the small joys they noticed each day. Gradually, their conversations deepened, encompassing their hopes for the future, the lessons they had learned, and the ways in which they had changed. Clara found herself sharing her dreams more openly, feeling safe in the knowledge that Jack would listen without judgment, that he would offer guidance without diminishing her experiences or feelings. Over time, Clara began to venture even further from the camp, exploring nearby towns and communities under Jack's careful guidance. She discovered the joys of daily life in a world no longer defined by fear. She learned to enjoy simple pleasures, baking bread, tending a small garden, and even laughing with children she met along the way. Each experience reinforced the sense of freedom she had worked so hard to reclaim, and she felt a growing confidence in her ability to navigate life independently. Jack remained a supportive presence, always nearby but never overbearing, allowing her to find her own rhythm and embrace her independence. Clara also reflected on the relationships she had formed with others who had survived hardship. She saw that shared experience created a deep, unspoken bond, a connection that transcended words. She began to mentor others who were recovering from difficult circumstances, offering encouragement, practical guidance, and emotional support. Through helping others, Clara discovered a sense of fulfillment and purpose that enriched her own healing. She realized that the compassion she had received from Jack and others could be passed forward, creating a chain of care and resilience that extended beyond herself. As months passed, Clara grew stronger, more confident, and more resilient. She had learned to navigate challenges with patience and grace, drawing on the lessons she had learned during her time in captivity and recovery. She had discovered a well of inner strength she had never known, and she had come to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. Each day she felt more fully herself, more capable of embracing life with open arms, and more committed to living in a way that honored the journey she had survived. Jack, too, reflected on the journey they had shared. He had come to care deeply for Clara, not just for the courage she had shown, but for the kindness, determination, and compassion that had guided her through every challenge. He admired the way she had grown, the way she had reclaimed her life, and the way she had chosen to turn her experiences into a source of strength and inspiration. Their relationship had evolved from one of guidance and protection into a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. Each recognized the other's strength and resilience, and each had been transformed by the bond they had formed. Eventually, Clara began to think about her life beyond the camp and beyond the immediate safety she had found. She knew that the world still held challenges, but she also knew that she was capable of facing them. She envisioned a future filled with purpose, joy, and connection, a life where she could use her experiences to help others, where she could celebrate the simple pleasures of freedom, and where she could cultivate relationships grounded in trust and respect. The journey of survival had become a journey of growth, and Clara was determined to carry the lessons she had learned into the rest of her life. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills and fields surrounding the camp, Clara stood with Jack at the edge of a small clearing. The air was crisp and clean, and the sky was painted with soft colors of dawn. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for her own survival, but for the courage, care, and unwavering support that had brought her to this moment. She looked at Jack, her eyes reflecting the depth of her appreciation, and understood that her life had been forever changed by the man who had believed in her when she had struggled to believe in herself. Clara realized that freedom was more than the absence of fear. It was the presence of hope, the ability to trust, and the opportunity to live fully. She had endured hardships that would have broken many, yet she had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more resilient. Her journey had taught her that life was fragile, but also remarkably capable of healing and growth. She knew that the experiences she had survived would remain a part of her, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they had shaped her into someone capable of great courage, empathy, and determination. As she looked toward the horizon, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would dedicate herself to helping others, to sharing the lessons she had learned, and to nurturing hope wherever it was needed. She would embrace the future with open arms, carrying forward the strength she had discovered within herself and the guidance she had received from Jack. The bond they shared would remain a source of inspiration, a reminder of the power of kindness, courage, and unwavering support. Clara understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she was prepared to face them. She had learned that hope could endure even in the darkest circumstances, that courage could be nurtured through compassion, and that human connection could transform lives. With Jack by her side and the lessons of her journey guiding her, she felt ready to embrace the fullness of life, to live not merely as a survivor, but as a woman transformed by adversity and strengthened by the enduring power of hope. And so, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, Clara stepped forward with confidence and determination. She carried with her the memories of the past, the lessons she had learned, and the gratitude she felt for the man who had changed her fate. She walked into the world with courage, resilience, and hope, knowing that her journey had not only saved her life, but had also given her the tools to create a life of meaning, purpose, and enduring joy. In the years that followed, Clara continued to thrive. She dedicated herself to helping others, using her experiences to inspire and guide those who had faced hardship. She remained close to Jack, cherishing the bond they had formed and the lessons they had shared. Together, they celebrated life's small joys, honored the strength of the human spirit, and carried forward the knowledge that courage, compassion, and hope could truly change a life forever. Clara's story became one of resilience, transformation, and enduring hope. The darkness she had faced in captivity had been overcome not only through survival, but through the kindness, courage, and unwavering support of another human being. And she knew, with a deep and abiding certainty, that the journey she had taken would continue to shape her, inspire her, and guide her every step of the way as she lived fully, freely, and with a heart forever changed.